You know how in some games there's just that one character who keeps on showing up stronger every time and pushes you to your limits? Well, that's exactly what I wanted for my monster taming action RPG, Synth Beast, and by the way, it's actually on Kickstarter right now. The campaign ends in 2 days, so check that out in the description. Anyways, this is Barabus, my game's recurring boss, and if you clicked on this video, you probably saw him on the thumbnail. He appears multiple times throughout the game, each time stronger and stronger, but let's go to the first encounter so that we can see how he starts. The beginning area of the game culminates in this little choke point that you can see right here, and that's actually where he lies, which means that despite how open my game is, every player will have to fight him at least this first time. So when you find him, he explains how he's been hunting you, which I'll explain later, and he starts off with 3 main attacks. Firstly is his basic fireball, which is just there to prevent players from spamming ranged attacks, although it's not very effective in this form because it's so basic, but of course that changes later on. And then there's this sword attack, which prevents the player from spamming melee attacks all the time close to the enemy, so it has a similar use case to the fireball, but in the opposite way. And then finally, there's this sort of dash attack, which does the same as the sword attack that I just mentioned, but it's a bit harder to dodge because it tracks you, so it's an evolution of that concept. So in practice, how this first boss fight works is that it keeps you in this ebb and flow between having to avoid the ranged attacks and also having to avoid the close-up melee attacks. I really like how Hugo Martin, the director of the modern Doom games, explains how to keep action games like this fun, and this ebb and flow is part of that, and I'm quite happy with how it's turned out. Of course though, this is the first encounter with the rival, so the fights get more complex, so let's go to the second fight and see what that looks like. Similarly to the first fight, Barabus has a fireball projectile attack, but as you can see, there are way more fireballs from this one attack than in the first fight. It's an actual volley of projectiles now, and this helps a lot more with the design objective of keeping the player on their toes. On top of that, he has a new attack in this fight, which is also a projectile, but it's much slower and much bigger, and the objective of this attack is to occupy space for a longer period of time so that the player has to think more about their movement. In particular, this new slow fireball works really well with the dash attack, which is more prominent in this fight, and in general, these additions make everything just a bit trickier and just a bit tighter, which ties back to the feeling of the ebb and flow that I'm trying to capture. One thing I haven't mentioned though is the source of Barabus' attacks. So, instead of making unique attacks for the fights, he actually pulls attacks from other monsters and bosses from the rest of the game. I alluded to the character's lore and how he's trying to hunt the player character, and that's actually because the player plays as the prototype, which is kind of like a monster that is the source of all other monsters. So Barabus' goal is to capture the DNA of all the monsters and then use that information to better his combat skills and get new attacks. So of course, when you're trying to achieve this, capturing the source of all monsters makes a lot of sense, right? Well, this is not all just for story because as I just mentioned, all of Barabus' attacks come from other monsters and bosses in the game. And this is just not some ploy to put in less work in the boss fights because, trust me, if anything, it makes it harder to fit all the attacks that already exist together into one fight. Instead, my idea is that these rival battles serve as a sort of bookmark or bookend for key points in the game. After you've gone through a certain amount of content, you battle Barabus, and everything is kind of presented in one neat little boss battle. It serves as a good test for the player, which I think is the hallmark of the best rival encounters. So then, what are some of the enemies that Barabus takes his attacks from? Well, the fireball comes from this little guy, which is one of the first enemies that you encounter. Then, the melee attack comes from this sentient knife. And the dash comes from this really cool boss that is actually completely optional. Finally, the big and slow projectiles come from this eye bat, which you actually encounter right before the second rival battle, so it's fresh in the player's memory when it comes up again. And of course, I have tons of plans to add tons more attacks from already existing monsters, like, for example, a really cool one is from this ghost guy, which teleports around and even has a kind of area of effect attack. I think this could pair really well with the slow projectiles, for example, since it makes the battles have 2 elements that control space for the player to consider. Then another one that I've been trying to get to work but I think needs some more visual work is the dive attack from this boss in the ice area. I think it could definitely work for Barabus, but I just don't want it to look so silly when it jumps so high. As you can see, I have tons of work to do, but I think it's going to make the rival battles super interesting. And actually, there is a way for you, the person who's watching, to be directly involved in this. As I mentioned at the start of the video, Synth Beast actually has its Kickstarter running right now, and it ends in less than 2 days. Some really cool rewards include creating your own monster, your own boss, or even your own island. So if these tiers look interesting to you, you can back, and because you'll be designing a part of the game, that can make its way to the rival battles as well, since those take elements from everything else. The Kickstarter has Steam, Switch 1, Switch 2, PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Xbox Series X or S builds, so whatever you play on, the campaign has got you covered. So if you want to support SynthBeast, I'd really appreciate it if you checked out the campaign, and otherwise you can also play the demo on Steam and wishlist the game on there if you like it as well. This devlog's a bit shorter than usual, but I was wondering if I should maybe test out to make shorter devlogs that I make in higher quantities. It would allow me to make more focused topics like this one, which is all about rival battles, so let me know what you think, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.